Modern animism makes the oldest spiritual belief easy for today's seekers to understand, practice, and live. Stay tuned and grow with us. You guys are in for a treat today. I'm sitting down with Hope Fitzgerald. Hope is a spiritual teacher, intuitive Dowser, coach, and the author of The Infinity Wave. She's also a healer and end-of-life midwife. And if you plan on dying sometime, you want to listen to her podcast. Hope is going to talk about her experiences as a death doula. And if you're afraid of death, I think it'll give you a sense of peace and hope. But first, let's acknowledge and give gratitude to the elements that are a part of us all. I acknowledge and thank the element of earth. Thank you for keeping us grounded, practical, discerning, and beautiful. You make our physical lives meaningful. Thank you. Acknowledge and thank the element of air for helping us to communicate with each other and across the veil. Thank you for inspiration, songs, poetry, and ideas that help us to create and connect. Thank you to fire for giving us strength, courage, and responsibility to use our power wisely. Thank you to water for keeping things moving so we're always changing, growing, and never bored. Thank you for our intuition and emotions that balance our lives. Thank you to our plant, animal, mineral, and human brothers, sisters, and ancestors. We know we're never alone, even in the absence of other people, because of you. Thank you to all our listeners for tuning in and supporting. If anything in the podcast inspires you or teaches you something, give back by using it to grow a little in your life in some positive way. Share it with someone else. A review or like is also really nice, so thanks. All right, guys, let's talk to Hope. Welcome, Hope. Thanks for being here.
So happy to be here, Laura. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. I would love to know what attracted you to working as an end-of-life midwife.
Well, a couple of things. One is, I think I just, when you look back on your life and you see the trail, but when you're in it, you don't see necessarily that there is a trail. I remember in high school, I just pulled this book off my parents' shelf called On Death and Dying by Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. And I sat down right then and there, and I pretty much read the entire book. And, I don't think there are too many high schoolers who are reading that sort of thing. I was so fascinated by it, and it stayed in my consciousness. And even when I went to grad school, I went to grad school twice, and the first time I created a whole play, a multimedia play for 10 to 12-year-olds on how to talk about death, how to deal with death, how to think about death. And then later on, in a second grad school thing, I had another project on death. So I was clearly attracted to the topic. And then I was present. I had a very interesting situation. My grandmother had cancer, and she was in hospice in our home. But at the time, I was living about an hour away in New York City, and I would come out on the weekends and be the nurse on the weekends. I also was always very interested in healing and medical things, that wanting to provide care. So we were very close, and I took over the care on the weekends. So anyway, it was Memorial Day weekend. It was Monday, and it was time to go back because I was going to have to go to work and all that. I got on the train. I said goodbye to her, and I got on the train to go back. And halfway back, my body started to just like turn inside out. I cannot even describe to you, but I knew I had to get off the train, and I had to go back. Now, here's the thing that's interesting. On holiday, the holiday train schedules trains are few and far between. And I was getting off a train at 9:30 at night in the middle of the New York commuter railway. I had to cross over. I had to wait for the next train to come, which was quite a while. I get in, I get a taxi back to my house. So by the time I got back, it was probably 11:30. But I was compelled. And now I believe I know why. Because I it turned out that my grandmother had moved into the final phase of leaving her body. I had never been with anyone as they were dying before. And I sat with her. Her eyes were partially open, and there was a tear that kept running down the side of her face. Now, at the time, I was a little nervous. I was by myself. The hospice nurse was sound asleep in the next room. And I didn't know what to expect. And nobody had prepared me for this situation. So I was a little bit nervous, what's going to happen, what can I expect, et cetera, et cetera. And when I saw that tear running down her face, I said, don't be afraid, don't be afraid, everything's going to be fine and all of that. Well, when somebody's dying from cancer, there are sounds, there are smells, there are things that are hard on the physical body, on my physical body, to be in the presence of that. And the more I stayed there, the more sort of agitated and nervous I got. And then something happened. I found myself sort of floating up. And I was a meditator at this point. I'd done a lot of spiritual work at this point. But I found myself sort of floating up to about 3 feet above my head. And from there, I felt like, oh, I had done this 1,000 times. This is so normal and natural to me. I was completely calm and at ease. So, and I would hang out up there, and then I would flop back down and be amongst the noise and the whatever. And again, the anxiety would start to sneak in. And then I'd pop back up, and I didn't have any control over it. This happened all night long. And I kept saying when I was down, don't be afraid, because I saw this tear. Of course, now I know her eyes were open, and there's this natural function of the body having the eyes open, and the tears are still going to have a place to go. So, but I didn't know that at the time. And as the night wore on, I found myself able to maintain that higher state, that state of calm, that state of knowing what this was about and how to do this, even though in this lifetime I had no prior knowledge. And then I got up quickly, just as the sun was coming up at about 6 o'clock, to use the restroom across the hall. I was gone 30 seconds. I was fast. And I came back, and she was breathing her last very slight breaths. The other breaths had been labored, slight breaths. And I realized, oh, she maybe was wanting to go on her own and not with me in the room. And then I thought, so that was my first experience, and it was profound. I was curious about this knowing place that I went to with the whole process. And so later my mother, who had found a medium, said that I should have a session with the medium because my grandmother might come through. Well, she did. And I had never told anybody before. I never told anybody what I said to her all night. I didn't tell anybody that I said, don't be afraid, the whole night long. And this medium, I sat down with her, and the first thing she says was, honey, why did you think I'd be afraid when we'd been through this so many times and you'd helped me through this so many times before? And I thought, okay, there's no way that this stranger would know that. And it also answered my question about the knowingness and the need to get back to her, that I absolutely had to be back to usher her through this process. So that is what really clicked in. The more advanced and adult version of my interest in this work. And then I had, many other experiences. Each one of them has been infused with a presence, a potency that I have been at births before, and it's there, but it's different. It has a different quality. And it's always an honor to usher somebody into the next world. It is so beautiful. And even if you have a problem with the person, even if you're still angry at the person, or maybe you don't even know the person, it doesn't matter. There is a presence and a force that is beautiful at the end of life. And so I like to call it, I mean, even though the trainings are called death doulas, I prefer to talk about it in terms of being a midwife to the afterlife, because it's easing that passage in whatever way we are humanly able to. So that pretty much answers the question, I think.
That's such a beautiful story, because I think most of the people that I know who are involved in it get interested in it later. I wasn't expecting that. But what does actually a end of life midwife do?
Very much the same kinds of things that a death doula does. It's just the name that I like better. It is we can do a variety of things. We can, first of all, help the person who is going to be passing, to understand that that's going to be happening. I find that denial is, it's an epidemic in our society. And I've talked to people who are skin and bone and can hardly walk, and they just think they need to eat a little more and exercise a little more, and the for whatever reason, the medical staff has not had the wherewithal to explain to them, oh, you're actually within 2 weeks of crossing over. And so but I think we as a group can come in and help the person come to terms with where they are in the process. The sooner we are able to do that, or maybe the person doesn't need it, but if somebody does need it, the sooner we're able to do that, the better. Because what I've found is that the person who is dying sets the tone for how the process will go. And if the person is in denial, then all their helpers, all their family members are kind of biting their tongue. And it means that they're not able to have the wonderful conversations that can happen at the end of life, where things can get kind of brought to a finish, a loving finish, ideally. And so when that person who's at the apex, the person who is going to be transitioning, comes to terms with it, then everybody relaxes. And there's so much more life happening at the end. And an ability to have what we loosely call a good death, which doesn't mean perfect. It just means satisfied, that the dying person has said everything they wish to say, that the people around them have said everything they wish to say. And there's love, and it's freedom. I feel the more freedom, the easier it is to have that transition. So that's one thing we do. Secondly, we talk with the family members, and we help them to come to terms and to maybe create a beautiful memorial piece. I mean, ideally, the person who's transitioning knows ahead of time, accepts it ahead of time, and works with the family members who wish to create something lasting in that person's memory. It could be a big quilt of every family member makes a different square for the quilt, or maybe it's a scroll, or maybe it's a book, or maybe it's videos, that there's a group effort to honor this person's life and for the person who's transitioning to actually be a part of it or ultimately see it finished. Finished or not, though, they know that the effort is there, and they know that it makes it easier when they know they've made an impact and that their work is done and that they've been appreciated. So those are the kinds of things that we do. We also are trained to understand the different stages when the people go into that final stage, and we can inform the family members, well, this is what stage we're in, and we can kind of guide them through the process. And the other thing is we can help the family to create an honoring space. Maybe ahead of time, we figure out what music this person would like, or maybe they like the candles, or maybe they like it bright and sunny. Everybody kind of has their own thing. When my mother was dying, it took a while. And during the day, she was in a coma. And of course, we know people who are in coma hear us very, very well. Hearing is the last thing to go. So my mother had a fantastic sense of humor, and she had a joke file in her filing cabinet. And so we played a bunch of Fred Astaire music that she loved to dance. So we did a whole bunch of things. And then it just got to feeling a little heavy in the room. So I got out the joke file and I started reading. We passed it around the room, and we all just started reading her collected jokes. And I know she appreciated that. I know that was just lighten the mood, because when they are crossing, the heaviness is hard for them. It's like anchors them down. The more we can be in a freeing state, a light state, a love state, the better.
Now, I'm sure there's lots of people who are listening who have never heard of an end of life midwife and maybe are thinking, well, they're in hospice. Do I need an end of life midwife if I have a hospice nurse? So, what's
Oh,
the difference between the two?
that's a really good question. And when hospice was first created, and anybody who wants to understand the heart and soul behind it, do read On Death and Dying by Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, because that is how hospice initially was configured and created. It has changed over time. It's now a service that everybody can have. So it's become an institution in itself. What my experience is that it's really person to person. There are hospice nurses who are absolutely what was envisioned by Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. And then there are some who are more by the book, just doing the necessary things, which means some of the medical stuff and just monitoring. So if you're lucky enough to get a hospice nurse, male or female, who carries the original flame, then no, you might not need a death doula or a midwife like myself. But I suspect that in most cases, it will be beneficial. So it's kind of on a case-by-case basis. I have worked with a hospice nurse before, and it's not, I don't want to put them down, because they are remarkable people, and they serve in a beautiful way. So I don't want to in any way cast aspersions, but I will say that sometimes they're not as open or willing to have the conversations with the family that a death doula is trained to have. So on a case-by-case basis, the family may feel like they want a little extra support. Let's put it that way. So it's like a midwife will have a doula as well. You know, the two of them will birth a
Yes.
baby,
Yes.
right? And one has the doula really takes care of the mom and deals with the mother's needs a lot, and the midwife is bringing the baby in. So it's a beautiful handoff. It's a partnership. So in much the same way, I see hospice and doula, death doula work.
Okay. So back in the day, most people died at home and it was a natural process. So, what do you think happened to us as people that we need professionals now to assist with this?
Oh, well, back in the day, in the turn of the previous century, 1800s to 1900s, people died a lot. People died a lot. Children died. People didn't live as long. Uh, you didn't think to go to a hospital because why would you? What could they do that was different, you know? And besides, doctors came to you in those days. So it was much more in the field, this family members dying, friends dying. It nowadays it is not. It is pushed away, hushed away. And I mean, if we really go back to previous, indigenous cultures, death was a part of their daily life. Death was actually what I've been taught is, especially through Tibetan Buddhism, is that you're you're dying every time you go to sleep and you're reborn every time you wake up. So learning how to die well was the most important thing you could do as a living human being. That means you have to practice it. You practice leaving your body. You practice this idea of leave taking, of which means, and that's where you get into non-attachment. You want to, if you practice that every night when you go to sleep, say, if I die tonight, I am fine. I am unattached from my belongings, from my people, from all of this kind of thing. And when I wake up in the morning, it'll be a gift and I'll live another day. So there are now ways to practice this dying, but only taught by a very few people. But I think just having the consciousness to think about it that way, what it does is it adds tremendous richness to life. It is when we live with the end in mind, then all our decisions are made off that backboard, right? If I die tomorrow, what are the decisions I'm going to make today? What are the what's most important just bubbles right up to the surface in that
Yeah.
kind of situation.
Mhm.
Stephen Levine wrote A Year to Live, a wonderful book that kind of where he walked down this path of living with the end in mind. And I just think it's a very healthy way to be. So what happened over time was that the medical establishment, has moved in and taken over. And we also have life extension capabilities. Yeah, it's a tricky little question. I don't know that we do need hospitals. I I would I would hope that people do die at home, just like they birth at home, but people are not usually equipped like I was in my first experience. I was nervous. I didn't know what to expect. And so I needed, it would have been helpful to have more guidance to understand so I could be there more fully present, although I got there eventually. Um, but a lot of people don't have that confidence and they're scared. They're scared. So they want somebody with superior powers, of the medical world to, sort of take care of things and lead them as they need to go.
Well, and I think too, and you said this in the beginning, if somebody around you is sick and dying, it can be long and hard and painful and smelly and all of these things. So, how do you, being that you do this all the time. How do you handle seeing people in that state over and over and over?
Well, it's interesting. My work doesn't uh take me to the bedside at the end all
Oh,
that often,
okay.
to tell you the
Okay.
truth. Um, the way that I deal with it is the same way that it happened naturally when I was with my grandmother. I go into an altered state, and I can help people at the bedside to do that with certain kinds of music. I really love a particular body of work called Graceful Passages by Gary Malkin and Michael Stillwater. And he did this 20 years ago. And it's a compilation of the wisdom keepers of the day all around the world speaking to him in a studio when he asked the question, if you found out you were going to die next week, what would you say? What would you want to say to your most beloved ones? And they would be in the studio for 2 hours, but finally get down to the real heart of the matter. Then he would take that, edit it, and then compose. He's a film scorer, so he composed filmic music underneath the spoken word. And I'm telling you, it is transformative. And each piece leads, whether it's for the person who's dying or the family or both, it opens the gateway for the conversation. It brings a sense of peace and ease to the room. And so I like to play that as much as possible. It's really something. So that's just one thing that I like to do.
That's awesome. So you're intuitive. And how does being intuitive or does being intuitive help you with this work?
Um, I'll give you two examples. One was when my mother was in her end stages. I was with my sister in the room. It was almost midnight, like 11:30. And I, in the old days, you'd go to a diner and there would be these flip cards and you could put a quarter in and hear the song that was listed on the little thing. And that's what appeared in my mind. And so a song would come up on the little flip card. And I said to my sister, oh, we need to sing this song. And I was a professional singer, so, but I was crying too. So, but usually they were Broadway tunes. So the song would come up, we would sing the song, try to get through it. And then the next song would flip up and the next song. So we were singing for I don't even know how long. And finally, and my mother loved Broadway shows, so it was perfect for her. And then finally, her favorite musical was The Sound of Music. And the song that gets flipped up is Climb Every Mountain. Now, Climb Every Mountain is a song that I would have to, do a little huffing and puffing to get that tune out in the best of times. But in a, having, I was raspy and I was crying and this and that. So getting that. So I didn't tell my sister when this one came up. I pushed it down and it flipped back up. I pushed it down and it flipped back up. I was like, dang it. I'm going to have to sing that song. Oh my gosh. It's got a big high note at the end. Oh my gosh. Anyway, I said to my sister, you're not going to believe it. We have to sing Climb Every Mountain. She went, oh no. I said, yes. So we were in an altered state already, right? So we start in. And the other part about Climb Every Mountain is whenever you hear it, you're going to cry no matter what, whether somebody is dying right in front of you or not. It's a cry song. So anyhow, we start in and we somehow get to the last line, till you find your dream. And my mother breathed her last breath. on the last note. And I realized then that the song was so inspiring to her that that's really what she needed for liftoff.
Mhm.
And she was working intuitively with me to communicate, oh, do this one, do this one. And I never saw Climb Every Mountain coming. She had the last laugh. And the very interesting thing is that there were sunflowers in a big bouquet. And when I looked over at the sunflowers afterwards, their heads had dropped. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. That's the thing about this presence that I'm talking about. There is a
Wow.
quality that is pervasive in the room, and unexplainable, mystical things can happen. The second story is my father. And that was a very different situation. And I had very different emotions around it. And he was in a similar state. We had been up all night with him as he was going through his, leave taking. And the morning came, and I heard him say Henry V. He didn't verbally say it, it was in my head. And I knew exactly what he meant. There's a speech in Shakespeare's Henry V called the Crispin Day speech. And it is it's my favorite Shakespeare speech. And it turns out, as I was caring for my father in his cancer at the end of his life, one night in the middle of the night, we were talking. Turns out it was his favorite Shakespeare speech. So I pulled it up, and I had all different actors playing, doing it for him. And this was months previous. And he got a kick out of all of that. But as I'm sitting at the bedside, I hear him say Henry V. And I scramble for my phone to pull up the Crispin Day speech. And I start to read it. And again, it's a tearjerker, that speech. You get caught in your throat when you hear it or read it. And so I was getting through it, and I got to the very end, and he breathed his last breath.
Wow.
So this is the kind of the intuition helps with this, what might be needed by the dying person
Mm-hmm.
for that last oomph to blast off, because we hope they will blast off, not linger and go out and not get all the way out. That's what it's meant by when you say you need to practice your dying. You don't want to be hanging around in the ethers. That's not good for anybody. It's not good for the living, and it's not good for the dead.
Right.
You want to blast off. So something inspiring to that person is often what's needed.
Mm. Wow. I had no idea what to expect from this interview, and you've just blown my mind the entire way. So tell us what you have coming up. What's going on for you?
Well, I recently published a book on
Nice.
the infinity wave, which is an energy that came to me in a series of visions in 2010. I've been teaching about it ever since, and it's something to help us with our spiritual evolution. It's absolutely fantastic, quick way to put us in a state of love and compassion. And that also, by the way, is helpful for people at the bedside and for the person who's dying to imagine themselves in this big figure eight made of flowing water. Inherent in the water is love and compassion at a very high level. So it just sort of loosens the spirit in the skin and starts to prepare the spirit to leave. But it also calms everybody down in the room and puts them in this state of love and compassion. So I have a retreat coming up and in Mount Shasta with the Infinity Wave. And I'm also working with my friend Gary Melkin, the one who I mentioned about Graceful Passages. He and I have a Graceful Passages workshop that we're doing. We do them online and we do them live. We're doing one in Nashville in the early May, first weekend of May. And so those are sort of events that are coming up. But I'm also a channeler, and I receive beautiful meditations every Monday night, and I do them for free online. So I invite people to come and experience that and see if you like it. Those are kind of the things that are on the hot burner right now.
Awesome. So, how does somebody get in touch with you?
Well, I would just encourage people to go to the website, which
Mhm.
is spreadinfinitehope.com. One word, Spread Infinite Hope, and sign up right there. And then you'll get my weekly blogs. You'll get announcements about the meditations. And I have an entire meditation library there that I have accrued since I started doing these online meditations during lockdown as a way to just do something, to offer. Now I've got hundreds of them, and people really enjoy going back through them because we've been taught by amazing guides, amazing people, beings. So there's a lot on there for free, and I welcome people to check it out.
Awesome. So those links will be in the show notes. And I thank you so much for being here, Hope. I appreciate you.
Thank you very much, Laura.